Dear students, in this module we will discuss about the Caldwell's theories on population. As part of the population theories we have been discussing. Specifically, we will discuss about various aspects related to the population theories proposed by John Caldwell. John Charles Jack Caldwell, who was a leading demographer, particularly in the fields of fertility transition and health transition. Dr. Caldwell extensively carried out research in several regions of the world, namely Africa, South Asia and Southeast Asia since 1959. Dr. Caldwell had a significant impact on demographic teaching, research and policy formulation. Those of you who are interested to know more about Dr. Caldwell can look into his biography and his academic and demographic research contributions by visiting the site given here. Dr. Caldwell pioneered in the application of anthropological approaches in demographic studies. Having discussed briefly about Dr. Caldwell, let us now understand the concept of wealth flows. We need to understand the concept of wealth flows when we are talking about theory of fertility decline. In this context, we have to pay attention to the aspects such as the basic concepts, research and theoretical considerations, the two distinct benefits from high fertility, the value of numbers, the situational advantage in familial relations of production, the need for a life cycle approach, variations in family systems of production, the undermining of the social systems supporting high fertility, the persistence of high fertility in the West, the Western fertility decline and the situation in the third world, the poor countries which are not developed and Eastern bloc of communist socialist countries. Wealth flows are defined in a wider context in terms of concepts like money, goods, services and guarantees that one individual provides to another. The term wealth is used not only with reference to income or money, but it also covers the non-monetary issues. The wealth flows analysis across generations or within the same generation is fundamental in understanding the nature of family relationships at all times and in all places. This is irrespective of time and space. The greatest value wealth flows analysis is found to be in economics of familial production. The fertility decline, as all of us know, is the result of changes in the family's internal economic structure. Wealth flows analysis has a wider application. It can be used to understand the mortality behavior, migration behavior and many non-demographic phenomena as well. Historically, human populations have experienced the advantages of having high fertility in many ways, and one of those advantages of having high fertility relates to economic advantage. There are three specific issues that need to be understood if the wealth flows proposition is to be understood in a satisfactory manner. The term economically advantageous, what do we mean by that? We mean that a value can be placed upon all satisfactions. Next, the term benefits and disadvantages, high fertility. It must be measured over the rest of a person's lifetime, and this measurement in an individual's lifetime can begin and be carried forward only from the time that an individual is first in a position to make fertility related decisions. When explaining stable high fertility and subsequent fertility decline in terms of lifetime net intergenerational wealth flows, several facts need to be given emphasis. These facts include the generations referred to in a peasant society and labor market society, or the generations within the family. The fundamental goals are social goals, just how comprehensive the wealth flows are. The subject is economic flows. There are really only two kinds of societies from a demographic point of view. One where unlimited fertility is an economic advantage, and the other where fertility is of no economic advantage, and the reversal of the situation, that is the onset of fertility decline is a reversal of the intergenerational wealth flow. The references are given. If the students are interested to know more about it, they can visit the address provided here from the web. Now let us look into the fertility theory, Caldwell's theory of intergenerational wealth flows. After reading the wealth flows theory described by many others, the review on wealth flows theory written by Kaplan and Bott is found to be useful and interesting for all the students and teachers alike. Therefore, many of the students as well as teachers made use of this review paper to present the Caldwell's wealth flows theory. John Caldwell's wealth flows theory proposes a direct link between family structure and fertility. According to this theory, there are only two major forms of family structure, differing principally in the direction of wealth flows among generations. In primitive and traditional societies, net wealth flows are primarily upward from younger to older generations, and individual interests are subjugated to corporate interests or family interests. So, we were discussing about John Caldwell's wealth flows theory. John Caldwell proposes a direct link between family structure and fertility. According to John Caldwell's theory, there are only two major forms of family structure, and these family structures differ in terms of direction of wealth flows among the generations. In the case of primitive and traditional societies, the net wealth flows are primarily upward from the younger generation to older generations, and in such scenario the individual interests are safeguarded to corporate interests or the family interests. That means the wealth flow is higher from the younger generation to older generation. Thus, the older generations are benefited from the younger generations. On the other hand, in case of the developed nations, the family structure is organized in terms of downward wealth flows. That means the parents are expected to provide for children's economic well-being. That is, wealth flow is lower from younger generation to older generation. Thus, the older generations are not benefited from the younger generations. The theory also proposes that fertility decisions in all the societies are economically rational responses to familial wealth flows. In societies with net upward wealth flows, the economically rational decision is to have as many surviving children as possible. Of course, this is subject to the constraints imposed by biology or the natural fertility, what we call it as, because each additional child adds positively to a parent's wealth, security in old age, and social and political well-being. In societies with net downward wealth flows, the economically rational decision is to have no children or the minimum number of children allowed by a psychological disposition that derives pleasure from children and parenting. The worldwide transition from high fertility to low fertility is the result of a change in the family structures from upward to downward wealth flows. As we know, the family structure is changing, and the change in the family structure is because of the spread of new values that placed a premium on individual satisfaction and achievement. Those values emanated from the educated middle class in the West and are now being exported to the developing world through mass formal education systems. Implicit in the educational materials and expectations of schools are transmitting the individualistic value system that produces downward wealth flows. Labor markets made the adoption of these individualistic values, which are opposing the family or group production characteristic of pre-transition societies, which are economically feasible. The transition from traditional to modern family structure takes place when a critical mass of individuals or certain proportion of individuals adopt the new values and respond with lower levels of fertility. The attainment of mass education in a country should therefore precipitate and predict the fertility transition. The most serious challenge to the theory of wealth flows came from the evolutionary biologists. The argument put forth by the biologists was that prior to modernization, upward wealth flows characterized by human family structures was inherently against the theory in evolutionary biology. The biologists expect net wealth flows to be downward in all organisms, including human beings. This research, generated by the biological critique of wealth flows theory, has stimulated the development of a new theoretical framework for understanding the human demographic patterns. However, wealth flows theory is not unique in proposing a link between cost of children and fertility. Some of the studies also have proposed that the cost of children and their economic value are major determinants of fertility. Some formal models were also developed focusing demand for children and focusing a trade-off between quantity and quality of children. Some others, however, argued that two forms of utility derived from children in pre-transition agricultural societies. There are studies that elaborated on demand for children and benefits received from the proceeds of child labor and old age security. The value of child labor in agricultural societies is documented by several scholars. During the 70s, some studies were documented. During the 70s, some studies have documented the economic contribution of children and importance of child labor in peasant societies and how these factors impact the family size as well as family structure. However, Caldwell's wealth flows theory differs from other theories. The wealth flows theory directly establishes linkage between intergenerational transfers across the life course and change in value systems regarding intergenerational transfer of wealth to fertility transition. Defining wealth as all the money, goods, services and guarantees that one person provides to another. The theory directly incorporates effects on status and political position as well as on material wealth. Together, those material and non-material transfer across the life course determine the net flow of wealth between generations and also affect societal norms regarding the emotional value of children. As with the economic models, Caldwell's theory recognizes technological impacts on wealth flows such as the change in economic value of education. While there is unique pleasure derived from having children, pleasure also will be derived from few children as their economic value decreases or the cost of educating them increases. However, unlike the more strictly economic models, value systems regarding support in old age and the relationship between the individual and the larger family are the primary determinants of intrafamilial wealth flows according to Caldwell's view. Now let us look at studies on economic value of children. Wealth flows theory has been tested in several ways by several others. Some tests were designed to determine if changes in the economic roles of children are associated with fertility transition. Several research were able to find evidence of such effects in sub-Saharan African countries. Similar results were also reported in several Asian countries with national level data. One study reported that adoption of socialistic economic principles in China may reduce the economic contribution of children and result in fertility decline. But it is reported in another study that the economic policy initiatives encouraging family economic independence may promote higher fertility. One of the studies had criticized Caldwell's hypothesis strongly on theoretical grounds. The author argued that members of an older generation will see offspring success as a substitute for their own and will therefore be willing to invest in offspring human capital at a higher rate than would be predicted if parents are acting solely in their own self-interest. In general, the studies discussed above are found to be weak in terms of methodology. How can we say that? We can say that because these studies did not adopt appropriate methods of measuring absolute flow of wealth. Rather, they used only indicators of changes in the economic contributions of children. Strong tests of the theory require that the children provide net economic benefits to parents in high fertility societies and not economic costs in low fertility societies. On the basis of data on net production and consumption through the life course, one study showed that in 3 lowland South American indigenous populations engaged in traditional economic pursuits of foraging and Sweden horticulture, offspring do not become net producers until their 20s and never compensate their parents in terms of economic investment. In a study of 27 peasant agricultural societies, it was found that while children are able to contribute to the household economy at a far higher rate than those documented in other studies, they still do not become net producers until their late teenage and never repay the initial parental investment. In a review of all the published studies, it was concluded that there is no data that shows a net wealth flow from children to parents for any society. Ironically, net upward wealth flows between generations are found in low fertility societies when public transfers such as Medicare and Social Security are included. Now let us discuss briefly about some of the studies on old age security. According to wealth flows theory, in the course of lifetime, parents receive economic benefits from their children during their old age. This is expected that the children will take care of the parents in the old age of the parents. This is known as the old age security. These benefits motivate high levels of fertility in traditional societies, where adult children are expected to support their aging parents in their old age. In modern society, the ethics of individualism and public support or government welfare securities for the aged will not motivate the parents to have high fertility. This is the difference between a traditional society where children are expected to provide old age security and the modern society where the individualism and public support to government, public support from the government in terms of welfare schemes will motivate the parents to have high fertility. Empirical evidence bearing on this hypothesis is also mixed. While using national level data for Indonesia, one study found that high fertility is positively correlated with perceptions regarding the likelihood of receiving old age support from children. Using the historical data from England and Wales, it was found that old age security was correlated with high fertility. Kane argued that children provide risk insurance for the elderly in South Asia. Using micro level data from Bangladesh, he also suggested that women desire high fertility to receive support from sons in old age as insurance against the loss of support from husband in the patriarchal society. It is also documented that the disintegration of the extended kin networks makes women even more dependent on sons for security. In one of the studies using micro level data from India, it was found that no evidence was there to say that old age security motivated high fertility levels. Thus, the evidence from the research in different countries is mixed. For example, the study from India indicates that there is no evidence that highlights the importance of old age security with regard to high levels of fertility levels in terms of the intentions of the parents. Many studies also found extremely low levels of support or expectations of support from the elderly by adult children in the United States of America, and this was also found to be true in other industrialized countries as well. None of these studies in the developing or developed world were explicitly concerned with the relationship between fertility and old age security. Now let us discuss about studies on mass education. Education played a prominent role in influencing the fertility transition. According to the wealth flows theory, education has been affecting fertility in three ways, all of them affecting the net cost of rearing the children. Education subverts or overthrows traditional communally oriented value systems and trains children to pursue individual goals at the expense of supporting their parents. It reduces children's ability to contribute to the household economy through diversion of time and loss of traditional skill and knowledge. Thirdly, education increases the direct and indirect cost of children by increasing their demand for consumer goods and also by establishing childhood as a period for receiving investment rather than contributing to the household economy. There is a great deal of empirical evidence with regard to the relationship between education and fertility, but it is not known about the relative contributions of these alternative causal routes and particularly about education's impact on fertility through changing values regarding family wealth flows. The empirical evidence regarding the impact of education on values is mixed. For instance, a meta-analysis of national level data from 37 sub-Saharan African countries found that primary school enrollment for both males and females in 1960 and 1990 had no significant effect on total fertility 15 and 30 years later respectively. The secondary school enrollment for males and females in 1960 had a weak negative effect on total fertility rate, while only male secondary school enrollment in 1980 had a strong negative effect on actual and estimated total fertility rates 10 to 25 years in the future. Several studies showed that children's school attendance affects the parental fertility. However, the causal process underlying this association is not clear, especially since parents who actively seek formal education for their children may differ from parents who do not do so with respect to the characteristics that are themselves determinants of low fertility. One study found that children's school attendance predicts the timing of onset of fertility decline in a cross-national sample of African countries. Many studies also report a negative impact of maternal education and fertility, but again several alternative causal hypotheses are consistent with the data. At present, there is no strong evidence for or against the strict interpretation of fertility transition as a cultural watershed generated by mass education. Now, let us summarize the wealth flows theory. The empirical evidences are not very concrete in proving many of the propositions stipulated in the wealth flows theory, but consistent with the propositions stipulated in wealth flows theory, there is a great deal of suggestive evidence that many parents agreed that change in costs of rearing children and their perception of the change in costs of childbearing is associated with fertility transition. People in many high fertility societies have also reported higher expectations regarding economic support during old age than do people in low fertility societies. That means the differences in terms of expectations of the parents in two different societies, one society with high fertility levels and the other society a society with low levels of fertility. in both the societies or across the two societies, one can find differences in the expectations of the parents in terms of economic support from their children during their old age. There are two major deficiencies in the theory proposed by John Caldwell. The data do not support a strict interpretation of the wealth flows hypothesis, and there is no direct quantitative evidence of net upward wealth flows from children to parents in any traditional high fertility society. However, as we have seen, according to the wealth flows theory, cultural transmission of new family values is the principal driving force in fertility transition. However, without a theory linking ecological conditions to cultural features and their distribution, the concept of culture risks being vague. Cause and effect, the unexplained explanator. Culture is many things. It is a body of accumulated information, a set of customs and rituals, group beliefs, and a mindset about the organization of the social and physical environments. Wealth flows theory of fertility transition is a major contribution to the field of demography. The theory is general in that it explains both high and low fertility regimes. In addition, the theory also addresses both independent variables and the psychological and social processes that translated those independent variables into individual behavior, with emphasis on economic as well as social factors in understanding the fertility transitions. The theory of wealth flows also helped in laying the groundwork for other theories of family to become a major perspective within the field of demography. It also has broadened the scope of demography by directing research attention to culture. That means the theory of wealth flow by Caldwell helped in laying the groundwork for other theories of family to become a major perspective in the study of demography. The theory also has helped in broadening the scope of demography through directing researchers' attention to culture. The theory also inspired and influenced a large number of scholars and demographers and population scientists to carry out empirical studies, especially anthropological studies in particular. So, dear students, in this module we discussed about the theory of wealth flows proposed by John Caldwell. The theory gives the relationship between the intentions of the parents about the number of children they want to have and the expectations from children in terms of old age security or in terms of the contribution of children to the family's income. However, there was some criticism of the theory proposed by Caldwell on several aspects, and the evidence from various countries, be it Africa or Asia, be it India or China or Bangladesh or United States of America, the evidence was mixed. Some of the studies were providing a positive feedback, while some of the studies were providing negative feedback with regard to the hypothesis proposed by John Caldwell, because the wealth flows theory of Caldwell was based on the economic value of the children, and the Caldwell theory also talked about the wealth flows. As we have seen, the wealth flows can be from the children to the parents or from the parents to the children. So, overall this module has helped us in understanding about the various concepts relating to the wealth flow theory proposed by Caldwell and its relevance in different kinds of societies, namely the high fertility societies, the low fertility societies, the developed countries and the developing countries. So, this module was very helpful for the students of population studies in understanding the relationship between wealth flows and fertility intentions of the parents. Thank you so much.